Hello, hi. Oh yeah, Artem. Thank you for pressing record because thank you for pressing record. So hello everybody. My name is Andrei. We have Artem as well with us today, and we have Dave West, who is going to be our speaker. So we welcome you on the very fresh initiative that was born the day before yesterday, which is called Agile with Ukraine. And as you all people might know, right now in Ukraine there is war. We suffered the Russian invasion on the 24th of February, and we kicked off this initiative to support Ukrainian people, but also support Ukrainian troops who right now are defending our land. So this is a completely free event, but all of the donations are very welcome. You can find the information how to donate on our website. And there are going to be three directions where the donations will go. So first direction is going to be a humanitarian medical help. Second will be the Kevlars and helmets. And third one is going to be the tactical equipment like night visions, thermal visions, and stuff like that. Gloves, clothes, and stuff like that for our troops. We're cooperating with the United Foundation that is set up in Poland. Yes, we'll share all of the information as well in the chat.
You can find already a link in the chat where you can read about foundation.
We're cooperating with United Foundation that is set up in Warsaw, Poland. A couple of words about the foundation. So foundation exists from the year 2014. This is the year when Russia first annexed the Crimea and also invaded Donbas region of Ukraine. And this foundation was supporting Ukrainian people and Ukrainian army since 2014. So this is a trusted foundation, and I know people in charge of this foundation personally. So I might be accountable for promoting them, but I trust them personally, and I also donate to that exact foundation. Why are we gathering money in Poland right now? For two reasons. First of all, this foundation is super fast. So we're all people that are connected to Agile, and we do appreciate the fast time to market. And one of the fastest ways the help can actually reach the people in need is actually donating to this foundation. Second reason is that right now it is all of the products that are bought and sent to Ukraine are bought right now from Europe. And we have large, big funds in Ukraine who have quite a lot of money at the moment. But since European Union and the US sanctioned Russia with SWIFT transactions, somehow Ukraine also suffered. So buying stuff from Ukraine in Europe is also pretty difficult right now. And this foundation is in direct communication with armed forces of Ukraine, but also with those large funds. So this is a trusted fund. So for the moment, we have links to Polish website, which is called zrzutka.pl. So this is the official Polish way. This is the official way how in Poland people are donating money. It has come to my attention today by Dave and also other my connections from my network from the US that there might be some issues with using that website from the US. Dave will tell you exactly how he managed to donate through that website, but also if you have any problems and you don't manage to donate through that website, we would kindly ask you to wait a couple of days because we're in process of setting up the PayPal account. And unfortunately, it's pretty bureaucratic here in Poland. Okay, so this is a couple of words about our initiative. If you have any questions, you can ping me, Artem, or any of other organizers that you can find on our website. And right now, I proudly present to you Dave West, the product owner and the CEO of Scrum.org. As a PST, personally, it's always a pleasure having Dave as a speaker, and have fun. Dave has a lot of value to share. Maybe Artem, you want to add something as well?
I want to add just a few words that it's a really startup, so don't judge us hard at the beginning. It's a first launch, and we were thinking how we can help more to Ukraine nowadays. I'm sitting in the western region near Ivano-Frankivsk, so I'm in Ukraine initially with my family. And we decided that the best what we could to do is to continue working, and what we are doing well, we are connecting an awesome people together. We like to connect an awesome people. We like to share knowledge, to organize events, to share knowledge between people, to connect people, and we decide that we will do it continuously. So it will be a long, long marathon with a lot of guests, stars, and we want to thank you, Dave, that you help us to kick off this initiative, becoming the first guest. We were totally unknowing the amount of people who will join, and thank you all 25 guests here. It's quite good result for 30 hours from idea to production. So thank you for belief in this initiative, and we kindly ask you to spread the word around with your connections, with your network, to bring more guests for next events. Next Tuesday will be Günther Verheyen, and afterwards will be Jürgen Apollo and many other star guests who are ready to contribute. And if you have some friends who also have a topics which could be shared and they are ready to contribute their own time, also connect them with us. So any support and help highly appreciated, and I wish you to get a lot of pleasure from the wisdom of our guest. Dave, the microphone is yours. Go to silent mode. Thank you.
Thanks, Artem. And hello, everybody. I'm sorry we're meeting in such sad circumstances, but hopefully we can make something positive out of this. I'm going to share my presentation. I'm a little rusty as well at presenting. This is not the first time I presented, but it is the second time this year, so I might be a little bit rusty. I'm trying to reduce my amount of presentation. So thank you for inviting me. As I said, it's unfortunate circumstance, but maybe we'll do some learning, maybe we'll do some sharing, maybe we'll do some laughing along the way as we talk a little bit about enterprise agility in the context of this very good cause. Before we do that, just remind everybody who I am: Scrum.org, CEO of Scrum.org, member of an amazing community of amazing professional Scrum trainers around the world, about 350 of us, and part of a broader Scrum community, including organizations like Scrum Alliance and the like. We stay very friendly with this broader Scrum community. So about a little bit less than 2 weeks ago, we decided to stop doing business with Russia. And it was a very difficult process that we went through to make that decision, because we have 6 awesome Russian trainers. The reason why I bring that up is because we very much believe that this war and this invasion is against humanity, and humanity is at the heart of Scrum. Humans, we believe in unlocking the potential of human beings through the power of Scrum. So that means that humans are at the heart of Scrum and at the heart of Scrum.org's values. So because of this act by Russia, this aggressive act against the Ukraine, we decided to pull out our business about 10 days ago, 12 days ago in Russia. We are not against the Russian people. We are against Russia as from an economic perspective, to sort of add to the growing number of Western-based organizations that are highlighting the fact that this is wrong and it needs to stop. So I'm very grateful to be part of a community that is very supportive of this, including the Russian trainers that were part of this community, and they understood and were in support of this action. So I just wanted to give you that context, because that's one of the reasons why I'm here. It's one of the reasons why I get up every day, is to try to help humanity get a little bit better in delivering valuable innovations to the world. And really, the last 2 years has not been when Ken Schwaber hired me about 7.5 years ago, I think, I would not have expected to deal with a global pandemic, Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, and now the senseless invasion of the Ukraine. It wouldn't, I thought I'd be spending my time arguing about safe versus less versus nexus versus. I thought I'd be spending my time discussing the difference between, the difference between Scrum and Kanban and why flow is still important and all those things. Instead, I spent an inordinate amount of time realigning our business to respond to a global pandemic, to deal with the systemic racism in the US, to do with all sorts of things, because we live in very interesting times now. And I think that this isn't the first time we've lived in interesting times. There's an economist that I very much like and I recommend. She's Venezuelan, but she lives in London and she works at London School of Economics. And she talks about technology ages, and it's Khalida Perez, and she's written a very good book called Technological Revolutions, Financial Capital. If you have a little bit of trouble sleeping, I recommend that book. It's definitely written as an economist would write a book for an academic audience. So yes, this can be a little challenging, but she's gone through these ages. And the reason why I highlight these ages is because I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we're in the third phase of the digital age. I believe ultimately that what we're seeing is this adoption of the digital age at scale now. And I think that the pandemic ultimately has brought that to pass. So that means we're entering a different world. Now, you may have noticed, if you look at this, that you'll notice when those bits in the middle, what tended to happen at the end of the bits in the middle, there was mass change in society. Obviously, the age of oil and mass production was kicked off really by the end of the Second World War. At the age of electricity and engineering, there was a significant, it was called the Mauve era or something, where there was multiple wars throughout Europe and throughout, even the US and Spain had a bit of a war. It was pretty horrible times, but then it was followed by a golden age in the case of all of this. Obviously the Belle Leclerc, the Progressive Era, the Victorian boom. My great grandparents were obviously a part of that in the United Kingdom. The post-war golden age, we all knew the Elvis Presley rock and roll, all that stuff. So I hope and I pray that this is a moment of darkness before a very bright dawn. And I pray not just because of the impact on the world and the horrible things that are happening, but I also pray because I think that ultimately we're going to see a significant change around how work is done, how people connect to their organizations and deliver value. And I think we've been wrestling with this in the Scrum community for the last 25 years as Scrum is being implemented in organizations that are predominantly focused in terms of orientation around mass production. Around this industrial paradigm, with long-term investment planning horizons and very short-term in terms of the profit. And maybe that's actually the last 40 years since the Reagan and Thatcher sort of age in UK and in the US. Scarcity is the mindset. How many times have you been in meetings? This just sums it up. How many times have you been in a meeting discussing spending $500 and you look around the room and you think, oh my gosh, we've spent $1,000 on this meeting. How many times do we think, that we don't, because we ultimately are so scared of doing things, we end up doing nothing. The risk versus trust mantra seems to be aligned incorrectly. Specialization of labor, process control, managers in the US, it's king. You have to be a manager, right? That's all changing. Now, many of you are involved in Scrum and Agile today, and you are the front, that sort of like that arrows, the front of the arrow with respect to this. You're driving your organizations to think a little bit more short-termist. Now, the pandemic taught us very clearly that planning longer than 3 to 6 months is way beyond our skills. Short-term planning and investment horizons, funding, 3-4 sprints, then taking an assessment to see how you're going. Defining a very clear product goal and a very clear sprint goal, but not spending an inordinate amount of time working out exactly how you're going to do that. Connecting it to the mission, to that goal, that outcomes that we seek. to think that we can solve any problem. You know, this foundation has set up this event in less than 2 days. Isn't that awesome? Now, yeah, there's definitely some teething problems, you know, and if you're in the US and you're listening to this presentation, you're trying to give to this to the organizations that we're promoting. You can see the link down there. Sometimes it might mean you have to try a little bit harder. You have to, you know, select that anti-fraud thing and then go back and try again, and all those things. Unfortunately, that will get better, and I'm imagining by the end of early next week, it'll be seamless and easy. And that's the beauty of the world we live in. We can solve problems very, very quickly, and we do that because we've got cross-functional teams, and this foundation is a collection of different individuals with different skills coming together to deliver value in pursuit of a very clear mission. And at the end of the day, everybody's doing it. It's about creators. There's not this, though we may have managers, people doing that, ultimately the most important assets in any organization are creators. The cycles that we're running to now are very different than they have been. So I'm fortunate to spend some time, or I've been fortunate to spend some time at Tesla with their head of product. And one thing that was really interesting, one thing that he said, and then Joe Justice repeated this in a couple of presentations he's delivered. Joe Justice is insane, so maybe you got this from the presentation, maybe you didn't. He's an amazing presenter, though sometimes a little bit all over the shop, worse than even I am. Awesome guy though. Anyway, so every single Tesla that comes off the production line is unique. Oh my God, because they change production processes continuously. And like, oh my God, that means they've had to bring in additional processes at the end to do that certification and sign off by the government, right? They've basically had to bring in the processes. So literally every single Tesla is unique that comes off that production line. Now, obviously, there's some consistency, but they've changed, how something's stuck to the car, or they've changed how the gear knob is. But we don't have a gear knob because it's got no transmission. But how some of the buttons are put on, et cetera, et cetera. They run simulated crash tests on every single Tesla that's on the production line. Innovation happens continuously. Imagine building a car manufacturing plant where every car is going to be unique. Can you imagine that? Now, most organizations, BMW, Volkswagen, etc., amazing cars, love them to bits, but they build a system where the cars don't change that frequently to allow them to do the certification once every 18 months, every 6 months, every 9 months, depending on the range. Isn't that interesting? How different? So how do we navigate to this blue world? So when we talk about this journey to enterprise agility, this journey to sort of like this different way of working, this, as we move into this post-industrial age, this digital age, I don't know how to sustain this and how to move into this, but I do know that we need to build a sustainable agile culture, and ultimately the journey is in itself reward to this process. And I highlighted 5 things that are really top of mind. Obviously I was asked to do this presentation yesterday evening, and we're working, so hopefully this will be good. We'll see. So support and protect agile values with strong leadership, and I'll talk about that. Help teams and stakeholders to self-organize. Manage your portfolio of outcomes. Outcomes are so important. One thing that I've noticed that really does bring a great Scrum team. So Scrum's used a lot to do work, and and there's a really good backlog, and it comes down for some magical process, maybe safe, maybe something else, and the product owner really is acting like a project manager, bringing in those, prioritizing depending on dependencies, and trying to remove those as quickly as possible. But they're doing work. And teams get some great stuff. They learn how to do the work well. They may even, storm on things. They work in maybe they pull the work rather than being pushed. They work in a great way. The most successful Scrum teams are teams where they're not pulling work, they're pulling value. There's a clear sprint goal that clearly articulates exactly what the outcome they're trying to see, that incremental movement towards that product goal. The best Scrum teams are aligned on value, and the best Scrum organizations are organizations where they basically, those teams have clear line of sight to the customers, to the users, to the people that are obtaining that value in some way. Waste gets in the way. We need systems that systematically remove them. And of course, we need to measure to drive this, whether it's OKRs or EBM or some other mechanism. So let's briefly whiz through these things. The first thing I need to remind all of you, and I probably don't need to remind it because you look like a bunch of very smart people, not that I know many of you, I know some of you. Scrum is really, really simple. You know, Ken and Jeff, 25 years ago, built something that is so elegantly simple. And it was that serendipity, right? They came together. Jeff and Ken had met. Jeff was a CTO. He employed Ken in his organization to deliver some stuff. Jeff brought his experience from about lean and his relationships with the new product game and the machine that changed the world, and introduced those to Ken. Ken ultimately worked with his brother, who was a scientist and took a process control scientist chemist, and he got the ideas of empiricism from him, and they brought all that together into a very simple framework that concentrates on 2 or 3 things. You could argue that there's 2 or 3. Empiricism, this idea of empirical incremental process, through transparency, inspection and adaption through transparency, empowering teams and people to make decisions so they actually get stuff done, and this continuous focus on 2 very clear improvements: an improvement to the product, the thing that we're delivering, the goal that we're moving towards with the sprint review, and improvement to the way we're working with the retrospective. That concept of improvement, and obviously improvement lives throughout, but those 2 are very clear. So Scrum's pretty simple. But without values, it doesn't thrive. Now, you're very fortunate to have probably one of the most expert people in our community, certainly in our professional Scrum community, Gunther, speaking, I think, on Tuesday, and he knows this stuff much better than I and can really articulate it well. The reason why values, which some would argue are contextual and should never be in the Scrum Guide, in fact, Ken spent a long time debating this, are in there, is because we believe that without values, it doesn't work. And I'll give you an example. So an organization, large consumer packaged goods company, that all of you are using those products every day. Maybe you're using their razors, maybe you're using their soap, maybe you're using their cleaning stuff. A big packaged goods organization, I'm not going to say their name because it's a little negative. They're really good. They've built some amazing products using Scrum, and they're trying to roll Scrum out across the whole organization. There was this one program that was picking up and using Scrum, and they had a sprint review. Oh, hang on, there's a little bit of feedback there.
We should be calling those out.
I'm sorry, guys, if somebody
I can mute him.
Not
can
muted.
mute him.
Okay.
There we go. Wow,
Yeah,
look at me. I actually knew how to do that. Anyway, so this organization was doing Scrum, and this one program was doing Scrum. They had a sprint review, and the sprint review was on this program that was a real problem program, and the sprint review was a train wreck, absolute train wreck. Not only did they, demonstrate the fact that they'd made very little progress, and that progress was probably wrong, they demonstrated actually that the sprint goal and the ultimate product goal were wrong, and the stakeholders weren't interested in it, and they were using the wrong people were involved, and everything that possibly could go wrong went wrong in terms of that sprint review. Now, interesting, I use the word train wreck there because ultimately I think that's the best sprint review you can possibly have, because it highlighted all the things that were wrong, which gives you an opportunity, guess what, to fix them. When you see something's wrong, and and hopefully it's not been catastrophic to the organization when you've seen this, or the teams involved, you have the opportunity. They only spent, I think it was a 3-week sprint, they only spent 3 weeks getting it wrong, and then all the right people in the room to actually provide the feedback to get it right. Guess what happened though? The leader, the band 6 that was on the call, then was like, this can never happen again. So he went both to the team and to each individuals, and told them they no longer could invite stakeholders. It was a disaster. And guess what happened then to the next sprint review? Sprint review was fine. Didn't actually uncover anything, looked like they were making progress. It was awful. And then slowly that program, guess what happened? It dissolved. People went to different places. They never delivered on it. Now, the outcome might have been the right outcome. It may not have been the right program, but ultimately what that leader, that band 6 did was undermine agility in the organization. Now, he was doing it because he didn't want to look bad in front of his peers who were invited to the sprint review. He wanted to ensure that whenever that he was being represented, and this team worked ultimately for him, that they were always showing the best thing. He didn't contextualize it or provide any context to those other people attending to set the guardrails for that meeting. And actually, he didn't even understand what they were trying to achieve. And he thought that anything that came out bad was a detriment to his career and his position in the organization. And those people were very burnt by Scrum and really didn't want to do it again. Now that is when it fails, when you haven't got that openness, where you don't have that respect, where you don't applaud courage. That was definitely that undermined it. Oh, sorry. Now, what people do is more important than what people say. Saying the right things is very important. I'll talk about that in a second. However, living that. So that leader should have said, this is great. We've learned loads of things. He should have actually turned that into a positive experience to reaffirm the values that he believes or he thought was necessary. Now, I think it's really unfair on the leader, actually. I don't think he had the support. I don't think he actually knew what he was trying to achieve. I think he was working to the mass production scarcity mindset. He was working in a way where risk is more important than anything else than trust, where he was working in a situation where it actually didn't focus on the outcomes, but was more about power and structure and prestige and respect and all that. So I can see why that happens. I don't necessarily blame him, but you have to now. But words are important as well. Understanding what that sprint review really meant was crucial, and using the right words. The reason why we say daily Scrum and not daily stand-up is for twofold. One, because obviously it automatically discludes people that can't stand up. We have a couple of PSTs that have challenges standing up. One's in a wheelchair and one has a degenerative disease that he can stand up, but he finds it hard. So we're reminded every day when I think of daily stand-up that they can't stand up, and that isn't. But and obviously that isn't inclusive and doesn't provide access for them. But there's another reason why we don't call it a daily stand-up and call it a daily Scrum. A Scrum is formed in rugby when the ball stops moving. Usually because somebody's in, when I played rugby, because I'd collapsed and had to be carried off crying. But that was just my experience of rugby. I was unlucky or lucky enough to go to school with two guys that ended up playing for England. One, Martin Johnson, ended up captaining England. So they were very good at rugby and used to kick the out of me every day. But anyway, so a Scrum would formed when Dave gets carried off the pitch. That was how ours always happened. And the reason why a Scrum's formed is to get the game going again. A daily Scrum is exactly that. When it was described in the new product game, I don't know if the authors actually knew what it really was, but they described it as this innovation team comes together, and it's a little bit of a little bit chaotic for a moment, and then they work on where they're going, and then they move on. The daily Scrum is an opportunity to inspect the previous day's work with a view to the next day's work. It's an opportunity to come together and get that ball, that work moving again. The reason why we say daily Scrum is to remind everybody that it's a Scrum and we're going to get the ball moving. And that's why we're there. We're not doing a status report meeting. We're not doing a remind everybody that we're still here. We're not doing a what did you watch on TV last night movie, meeting. No, it's a daily Scrum. So words are important. And maybe in that example of that packaged consumer packaged goods organization, Maybe if we'd have actually used the right words to describe the sprint review, maybe if we'd have helped people understand what we mean by sprint review, maybe review is not a great name, but I'm not going to go there, but that's another story. But ultimately, we wanted that opportunity to inspect and adapt the product increment, to look at the product goal in light of that increment and the sprint goal in light of that increment, to unpack the findings that we found, as it were. So words are important. So leaders, the reason why it's so important for this journey to enterprise agility, so leaders need to think about us in terms of, think about describing the goals that they're trying to achieve, then creating the environment around those goals that's safe for people really to push those goals. I'm overusing the Scrum metaphor now, but to push against those goals, to find out how feasible those goals are, to find out how economic those goals are, to really clearly challenge those goals in the context. And then the leaders need to model the behaviors that they expect from the team, from the stakeholders, and from themselves to help create that environment. So that's the first thing that's crucial for this journey to enterprise agility. The second one is about self-organization. Self-organization. It's an anathema to the industrial mindset. This idea that we allow people, we trust people, we empower people, we support people to organize around the goal in a way that best suits them. The organization structures that many of you are in were built over the last, well, since the 40s, really. So it's a little bit less than 100 years. It's probably like 70, 80 years. And they're not designed, they're designed for managing risk. They're designed around this idea that basically Taylorism and the ideas that came out of the mass manufacturing, building bridges, building cars, building aircraft, and actually building tanks, building those things, because a lot of the learning happened during the Second World War. They weren't built around agility. And I think that is a problem. You need to think a little bit differently. And there's a good Dr. John Cotter did I was fortunate to sit down with him and Ken Schwaber, oh gosh, about 5, 6 years ago. And he talked a little bit about enterprise change and how it's really not working, changing existing organizations, and he proposed a different model. I don't necessarily believe that model works either, from my experience in a number of large organizations and their innovation initiatives, but it's definitely worth listening to that video to see if it makes sense. The other thing that's really interesting is around the motivation of people. And many people have read Drive, the surprising truth that motivates us, about extrinsic, intrinsic, and biological motivation. Ultimately, we have to build organizations that focus on that intrinsic motivation. We need to build organizations that are autonomy, mastery, purpose, that provide autonomy, mastery, and purpose for those teams. Autonomy around self-organization. Mastery, a support network that helps people actually get good at their craft and help deliver the value that is needed. You know, in the Spotify model, guilds and chapters are definitely part of that. And purpose, that clear goal that's being presented to us from our leaders. The other thing that's interesting about self-organization and this building the right organization around this is the role of managers and leaders in respect to this. The most important people in the organization are the people that are delivering value. Everybody else is overhead, really, including people like me, which is awful. I spent, I'm in my mid-50s now. I spent the last, I guess, 30-something years becoming a CEO. And then I'm told that this is the organizational model that we run to now. I mean, that's a little disappointing, isn't it? Anyway, but I'm doing my best to support my teams, my leaders, and the delivery teams that deliver to customers. We have to think about how we invert that organization. And that means clarity of purpose, clarity of direction, and then providing the environment that allows them to thrive. Create an organization that creates mutual respect, shared values, goals, commitments, allows independence. So looking at dependencies, looking at some of the choices we made around that, and creating that not just for the teams, but for the stakeholders, for the Scrum Master, for the product owner, for everybody to work together on that. There's lots of reasons why that doesn't work. You know, there's Fidelity Investments was the second organization ever to do Scrum in the world, and they're an amazing financial services company doing amazing rapid stuff, and they use Scrum massively. Over the last 20 something years that they've been trying Scrum, they've had some issues. They had issues around bonuses, for instance, which was based on these very clear KPIs that were described in the start of the year, which didn't necessarily inspect and adapt to the environment as they changed. Therefore, people, though were working in a team, ultimately were very wary of doing things that undermine their ability to deliver against their bonus. The promotion aspect, that example of that consumer packaged goods thing, that band 6 was very conscious about their career. The way you get promoted in that company is profile. And anytime something looks bad, that ultimately undermines that. You know, the alignment to the customers can get in the way where you're a small cog in this big system. Thinking about all these things can really get in the way of self-organization. But if we don't empower our teams to self-organize, we are not smart enough. I am not smart enough to tell my teams how to organize into response to the goals that I'm setting. I am smart enough, hopefully, to set the right goals, or to set the goals that I think are right now, and then be open enough when these teams respond to them to actually make changes to those decisions. Number 3 on this list is around outcomes. Did you know that about 2/3 of the work that you do doesn't add any value? That's not true. I'm sure you're all pretty awesome and doing a fantastic job. But if you collected all the knowledge workers in the world and got them in a really, really big hall, literally most of 3/4 of them wouldn't be adding necessarily value. You know, there's an interesting a book called, and I apologize for my language here, Bullshit Jobs. And it's a really interesting book. I read it recently because it's quite a nice book to read before you go to bed, because there's lots of humorous stories in it about people that there was this one guy in Italy that had been working. He got an award for working for this government department for 30 years, and they couldn't find him because actually for the last 20 something years, he was actually doing his PhD and doing research on a completely different thing, because his job was, he considered to be, he could do it in like 20 minutes and then he would move on and do his research. And that, you know, it's got interesting stories. But the intent is really, when we don't have a clear definition of a goal and we don't empower teams to make decisions against that goal, it's very likely, as our knowledge and appreciation changes, as we do stuff, that we're going to build things that people don't necessarily want or rarely want. We spend a lot of time building things that we think people want, rather than delivering things that they actually want. And so it's really important to think about outcomes. Now, this changed my life. I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Jeff and Josh and Lean UX, and we have a class, Professional Scrum User Experience, that they worked on with our community to build a class that very much talks this. I attended the beta of this class and went back as the product owner and looked at my backlogs. They were all about work. And I was like, oh my God, I was even using user stories and all that, but it was still very centered on the solution. The context of the story was still very centered on the solution. So I went back and I chopped up my backlog and removed a lot of things to concentrate on outcomes. And so I refined that. And those outcomes are in the context of human beings, people. So the use of personas. How many, ladies and gentlemen, how many personas do you have on the wall or on your mural board or however you're working? How many times do you describe everything in your backlog in the context of that persona? How many times do you run your daily scrum talking about the work you're doing in support of that? How many times are your sprint reviews focused on the impact to the customer and what that means to that persona? That outcome gap, that satisfaction gap is definitely something that we all strive towards. And then avoid people like me, highly paid person's opinions. I mean, don't ignore me because I'm awesome. No, listen to me, pretend you're listening to me, but then use that as a catalyst to drive to actually what you're trying to achieve, which is deliver value, deliver outcomes. So, and I'm conscious of time, and I hadn't actually totally planned this presentation in terms of the time. So I'm going to whiz through the last two relatively easy ones, particularly this one, because I think it's very clear. One of the biggest wastes that we see, and we tried to address this when we did Nexus and wrote the book, the Nexus book and the framework, was really dependencies. Dependencies really do reduce delivery capability. You've got to be very focused on maniacally removing dependencies. Now, some dependencies are necessary. You know, some dependencies are important. Some dependencies are historic. You know, allowing teams to effectively make choices and then presenting why those dependencies are in the context of the value that they're doing, rather than just because you have to do that, enables teams to rapidly deliver value. So think about that. Also, think about those wait times. We added a class that taught me this very recently, a professional Scrum Kanban, and I've been spending a lot of time with Daniel Vacanti and that community of Kanban practitioners, teaching me a little bit about flow, teaching me a little bit about, you know, how you can think about estimation and planning in a better way, teaching me a little bit about waste and this sort of like and some wastes, you know, that are very clear and some that are less clear, particularly around these waiting times that we have in many organizations. So make those things transparent. That's what Scrum would teach you. As soon as you start making these things transparent, then you can start addressing them. And it becomes less about, well, I think we can move into this now. Well, let's have a view of it. Let's make these things transparent, because it's very clear if you've got a good Kanban board, if you're actually starting to capture some of those metrics and, you know, wait times and the like, how long things have been in particular states, you start getting a really good understanding of the flow of work inside the Scrum team. You then visualize it across Scrum teams, across the whole delivery process, and you start, and maybe from idea to implementation, you start getting a real good handle on the waste in your organization. And it's very, very worrying. And if you had a chance to look at the work of Mick Curson and some of the stuff they're doing at TaskTop and you know, project to product, he wrote a really interesting book that talks a lot about BMW and their experiences in this. Some really interesting stuff. The other thing that's interesting is trying to think about these 4 dimensions, thinking about it in terms of how people are working together, thinking about it, what tools they're deploying to do that, and thinking about whether we're building the right stuff. Those 3 dimensions can clearly help us understand the waste that is manifest itself. And, you know, building the wrong thing badly with the wrong tools really is the embodiment of a disaster. Feedback loops. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's super, super simple. Ideas get delivered, we get feedback, economic value and feedback happens, we then inspect and adapt that, and we move on. In most organizations, though, that's so complicated that it's almost impossible. So to some extent, most agile transformations are trying to get a real clear view of the customer and get that sort of like that feedback into the system. You know, if you go and see Craig Larman and listen to him, he talks about how to do that. You know, with and obviously Les is very focused on that. When you look at, you know, most organizational change initiatives, they're focusing on the structures, they're focusing on the jobs, roles, they're focusing on the processes. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to see is look at that end-to-end process from a view to feedback. If we can increase the speed of feedback and ensure that we're getting the right information, then we're in a really, really good position. Now, I took some slides out here for that bit, but at the end of the day, any measures that don't focus on getting those metrics of back into the system as fast as possible are not successful. So, wow, that was a bit of a roller coaster ride, wasn't it? And, you know, luckily there's going to be a lot better presentations going forward. So I was the start. Maybe I just warmed the room up, and I'm really excited to listen to the future presentations that are coming. I just want to just, in summary, talk about these 5 things. It all begins with values. Even though I'm an engineer by I guess training, I spent time developing a process called the Rational Unified process. I became an analyst. I went to a startup. I delivered. At the end of the day, I actually think this is true. Values really can define everything about an organization. You need to empower people and trust them, which is a value, but also building an environment that not just trusts them, but supports them. We learned this, I think I learned this when I was at a startup. We never had, when I started at this particular startup, we were like, I think 12, 15 people. Our engineering team that I ran was 5 people, right? We never had all the skills necessary to deliver the value. However, what we did do was we gave clear purpose, clear, transparent focus on outcomes, clear connection to the customer, and then created an environment where we were empowered to bring in the things we needed to make those choices. Tesla's another great example of this. You can do pretty much anything you want at Tesla, as long as you're within certain guardrails. You can buy in new equipment. You can literally really change the status quo. Now, if that doesn't help, you are accountable for it. You are, when it actually happens, you're both responsible and accountable, which can be challenging. We need to think about the world in terms of outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? Not what are we doing? What are we trying to achieve? Remove waste that gets in the way of you achieving that, and then build measures and metrics around that feedback loop and the feedback of the value, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. The last word I just want to sort of focus on is really, don't adopt Agile in a waterfall manner. Now, we see this happen all the time, but incremental change, this journey is so important. And actually building a clear goal and building a mechanism to actually move the journey, to start walking, is perhaps the most important thing that you can do. It's hard, it's not easy. You're fighting against a paradigm that has changed our world, that has built bridges and created a mass standard of living throughout the world, that has built, rockets to the moon, which has built Netflix and all sorts of, actually, I would argue that was built using a digital thing, but it's built bridges, it's built tunnels, the Channel Tunnel in the UK to Europe. We've done amazing things, but I believe we're moving to a different stage. And unfortunately, what many of you are feeling today is the friction as we move to this next technology revolution, as we move to the deployment phase of the digital age. That friction is where all the pain is in terms of your Agile adoption. Now, thank you for spending the time with me today. It's, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. We have a great opportunity through the foundation and through the work that they're doing to make a difference. We also have an opportunity to learn as we're going through this process. I'm going to be attending some of the talks. There's some really cool people speaking. If you need anything from me, I'm here to help. I stand with Ukraine from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm sorry that I couldn't be closer to you and helping you in more positive ways, but this is the best I can do today. The link's down there. If you're in the US and you're clicking on that link and you're having a little bit of trouble giving, persevere, try a different card, try a different approach, wait a couple of days. It is the best way. The Ukrainian trainers that I've been working with say me this is the best way of getting funds to where it's really needed. Thank you for spending the time today. And maybe we've got a time for a few questions. Hopefully there's some questions. I'm going to stop presenting so I can actually, maybe I'm going to stop presenting. I'm going to stop presenting so I can see some faces. Hopefully this has been interesting. And are there any questions?
Well, it truly was. Thanks a lot, Dave, for the presentation. maybe while people are writing the questions in the, for example, chat, maybe I'm gonna ask one question.
Ooh.
So I know that you were observing the situation around Ukraine, and right now you were talking about where the organization should go towards, right? How do you think, what would be the learning out of the situation, out of the war in Ukraine, that the organization must learn? What can
Well,
the organizations take into account?
I think there's two things that we learn. I think number one is it's very important to be true to your values, and I think that Scrum.org is, we don't always get it right. We're not always perfect. There's criticism like, what about Crimea happened? You didn't do anything then, and the like. And yeah, I'm sorry, we didn't. I can't speak to the past, or I even can't speak to the future. But what I hope to always say is that Scrum.org will follow its values when I'm leading Scrum.org. So I think number one is really think about those values. And if your organization or your team or whatever are having challenges around this, then step back and say, what are our values? There was a great example is McKinsey. So I was fortunate to spend some time with some very senior people at McKinsey about a week ago. And I observed that they have completely pulled out of Russia, which is very un-McKinsey-like. You know what they're like. They're like, we're above. They're like the Watchers if you're a Marvel fan or comic books. Anyway, they're like sort of like above everything. They're like, we're more evolved. Therefore, you fight and do whatever. We just give advice, right? We can't be held accountable. And the reason why they pulled out was interesting. They initially decided to not do business with any Russian government agencies. They got a massive feedback from their organization. The new CEO got like over 1,000 emails. It broke his inbox. And they said, basically repeating, this is our value, you're contradicting it. And so within 24 hours, they did two things. They stopped doing business with any Russian based organization. They also provided an opportunity for all of their Russian consultants to leave, to go to Turkey, to go to Poland, to go to Germany. It was a bit hard because there was no flights and stuff. So there were some challenges, but they did that, and they've provided support for their families and the like. Obviously, some of them can't leave because, for whatever reason, but they did that because they followed their values and they were reminded of those values. And CEOs aren't omnipotent, senior leaders aren't omnipotent. So I think it's the responsibility of everybody to remind you of those values. And we've had some very good and very open and sometimes very emotional conversations about what's happening in Ukraine and discussing getting to the core of it, getting to that value about humanity and the importance that Scrum holds human beings. And I've been taught that by people like Gunther and Ken. That at the heart of it is about teams of human beings being direct, having that space to do amazing things and tapping their potential. So I think the other thing was about values. The other thing that it taught us actually, which is, so that's a very deep learning, and let's all sit around and maybe have a glass of wine talking about it. The second thing really was the power of Scrum. So guess what I did? I created a product goal. Very clear goal about what we were trying to achieve in terms of removing economic support for the Russian or for Russia, and I had that very clearly defined product goal. I then allowed my team to work with the community at large to decide how we're going to implement it. We had a backlog. We worked through that backlog. It was you could argue a daily sprint because we had a focus, and those backlog items look remarkably like sprint goals, but anyway, and that's how we worked to deliver this. And we made the decision, not instantly, we talked to lots of people, we got feedback, but relatively quickly because we could do that because we had a very clear goal in mind. So that's a very tactical thing that it taught us. And then there was a more deep sort of like values, questioning our own values. The New York Times wrote a really interesting article about why companies have responded so quickly and so much stronger than many governments have responded to Russia. And it really talked about those values, and it talked about the role of humanity and the fact that we as leaders of companies and organizations feel that we have a conscious responsibility to the world we live in. And I think that's very true. Values are key. Gosh, that was a very long answer, wasn't it? I didn't mean it to be. Sorry, Andrew.
But that was an awesome answer, I think. Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? So you just guys can unmute yourself and ask Dave. This is a unique opportunity.
I don't know how unique. I'm always round and about, but it is an opportunity. And there's lots of really smart people on this call. If I can't answer it, let's. Any questions or comments? I know it's very hard. Also, I know English isn't necessarily your first language. It's barely mine. I live in America and I'm British, so I have this. My grandmother used to describe me as mid-Atlantic, which I think was an insult. I never really asked her before she passed, but so I apologize. I know it's kind of stressful when you having to speak English. I apologize. I can't speak a little bit of French, but that was. I had a Scottish French teacher in school, and I'm still got the scars to prove it. It's pretty awful. Madame McGregor.
I learned French at school, and the only thing I remember is how to order beer and some swearing. So
bon, I know how to say bon. Le songe de ange d'arbre. The monkey is in the trees. That's a classic. Yeah. Any questions or comments? Doesn't have to. Can be about Scrum. Can be about Scrum.org. Can be about Agile. Can be anything you want.
Oh, maybe guys, you can just even share what would you like to hear about in the future.
Yeah, what other events would you like?
Yeah.
And I've got a reasonably good network, and between us, we could probably find somebody.
Actually, I had, well, maybe a stupid question, but rather an open one, in light of the current situation when we're looking at the uncertainty of the future. Dave, you started your talk with the words that we are on a breakthrough, right? And we might be leading towards some greater new sort of world. In your wildest dreams, what would be the major differences between what it is and what is now? Let me add a little bit of context. Everything that you have shared today and reminded us about the Scrum values, about the courage, focus, and fun stories is all true, but still so many companies still live within their own world where everything is planned, not even for the half a year, but oh my God, for a year or two ahead, right? So in your vision of the future, what would be those breakthrough times like? What we would change?
So I am an optimist, you're right. I really do believe we're at there's moments that we're starting to see it. We're seeing it in certain organizations. We're not seeing it uniformly in those organizations. But I believe that, and you're also right, that most traditional organizations are still so steeped in the past way of working that it's almost impossible for them to change. So a couple of things. Number one, unfortunately, I'm reminded of an expression around science. Science advances one funeral at a time. And I don't believe that in terms of I believe that leaders are going to be, the new group of leaders are coming through in these organizations as other leaders retire. So I think to some extent, the future does require the next generation to be stepping up into the positions. It's very hard to and I do this all the time. I was at a large bank a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to their executives, their C-level, and this is a big bank. I was talking to them about agility, and I looked around the room, and everybody was a white guy in their 50s, late 50s, older than me, actually, maybe early 60s. And I thought to myself, why would you change? Why? It's going to be hard. It's going to be painful. You're going to not feel in your comfort zone. There's just no way. So I was like saying to myself, and I was like, are we going to have to wait 5 years for it? I do think there's going to be a little bit of that. I also think there's going to be a forced movement, because let's be frank, you know, the Googles, the Amazons, the Netflix, all these companies are outperforming them. The Teslas, look at what Tesla has done to automotive. Look at what SpaceX has done to space distribution. It's really, really good that SpaceX has done it, because otherwise we'd be dependent on Russian spaceships taking our satellites up. So amazing things are happening, and people are watching those and are doing. You asked what the biggest change is going to be. I think the biggest change is going to be teams are going to form, cross-functional teams are going to form that have a clear line of sight to their customer. I think the biggest change is those teams are going to be in an environment that creates psychological safety, where they have a support network that allows them to thrive. And maybe it's the Spotify model, maybe it's the ING model, I don't care what it's called. But at the end of the day, seeing teams really empowered to make decisions and having a clear understanding of the customers that they serve, I think that's going to be the biggest change. And this flattening of organizations around it. It's a hard one though. And I feel your pain. I get on those calls. I'm like, whew. Well, first, it always starts with Microsoft Teams that nobody can give you access to, and it's always a disaster. And then it just goes down from there. Hopefully that answered your question. And thank you. And thank you for the courage to actually ask a question. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for the warm anticipation of the changes to come. And thank you for this vision of yours.
I do believe it's the darkest before the dawn. I do believe that. I'm like Bill Gates also is a bit of an optimist, right? The fact that how we responded to the pandemic was awful in some ways, but we built a vaccine really quickly. Anyway, so, and it's people like you, everybody on this call, that are going to drive this change, this bright new world. So I applaud you every day for doing your best and delivering the value and helping get better. So thank you. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for organizing this event. This is the first of, if you're tuning in on the video, this is the first of many. Go and see some much better speakers than me. I believe Gunther's on Tuesday. So he's much better at presenting than I am. And then there's others that are even better. So I'm excited to see this roll out. And remember, don't forget to donate.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Please donate. If you already donated, please share this information with as much people as possible. Thank you very much, and see you on next ones.
See you on the next one, everybody.
Next one will be on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
Stay safe.
Agile with Ukraine #1.
Yep.
Stay safe. Hug your families.
Слава Україні.
Героям слава. See you guys.